Good morning, students. Continuing with the same chapter, that is chapter 3, we were doing economic reforms 1991. Since 1991, we are following new economic reforms. And under the new economic reforms in the previous class, we have done that Indian economy adopted liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Now, first of all, we are going to study liberalization. Now, what do you understand by liberalization? By liberalization, we mean freeing the Indian industries from the control and restrictions of the government. Whatever necessary controls and restrictions were required by the Indian industries, freeing them from those control and restrictions of the government. In the planning period, we had seen that there were various restrictions with the Indian industries. They had to follow various rules and regulations of the government since the government was given the leading role. Now, in liberalization, we are going to remove all those necessary controls and restrictions. Various reforms were adopted in liberalization. Now, first we will see industrial sector reforms adopted under liberalization. Industrial sector reforms included abolition of industrial licensing. Now, prior to 1991, we had seen that private industries, the private sector was controlled by the government through industrial licensing. Any new industry or any existing industry, both were required to get the license from the government, and only then the new industry was allowed to set themselves, and the existing industries were allowed to expand themselves. In 1991, under the liberalization in industrial sector reforms, the industrial licensing was removed. Except few industries, the industrial licensing was removed, but the industrial licensing was still required by few industries like hazardous chemicals, industrial explosives, aerospace, drugs, and pharmaceuticals. These were few industries which still required licensing from the government. We had also seen that public sector was given the leading role under the planning period, that is prior to 1991. But in 1991, under the industrial sector reforms, the public sector was now no more given a leading role, and it was restricted only to few industries like defense, atomic energy, and railway transport. Only these three industries are now only reserved for public sector, and in all other industries, private sector can start its production. We had also seen prior to 1991, the reservation of certain goods production was for the small scale industries. But in liberalization under industrial sector reforms, there was de-reservation of small scale industries. No more the production of goods was restricted only for small scale industries. We have also seen that the determination of prices was given to the market forces, that is, demand and supply of goods and services. The another reform which was adopted under liberalization was financial sector reforms. Under the financial sector reforms, the role of RBI was reduced from being the regulator to the facilitator. Now, no more RBI will act as a regulator and will control the financial system, but will only act as facilitator, where he will be facilitating the entire financial system. However, few managerial aspects were still retained by the RBI so that the interest of account holders and nation can be safeguarded by RBI. Under the financial sector reform in 1991, and after that, we started seeing some private banks started coming up to India. That could be Indian banks as well as foreign private banks. The banks, after fulfilling the certain rules and regulations provided by the RBI, could set up their branches without getting any approval from the RBI. The certain rules and regulations are provided by the RBI. If those rules and regulations are completely fulfilled by the commercial banks, they can make their own decision making, and they can set up their branches without getting any approval at any place. We have also seen foreign institutional investors like mutual funds and pension funds and merchant bankers. They were allowed to invest in financial system. The next reform which was adopted under liberalization was tax reforms. These reforms are concerned with taxation reforms and the government expenditure. These reforms can also be known as fiscal policy. Under the fiscal reforms, or we can say tax reforms, first of all, the tax rates were reduced. Earlier, the tax rates were very high. Those tax rates were reduced with the aim in order to reduce tax evasion. It was believed that if the tax rates are high, then there is more cases of tax evasion. Tax evasion means not making the payment of their tax liability. So the government believed if the tax rates are reduced, then the cases of tax evasion will automatically be reduced. The government also simplified the tax procedures, where earlier the procedure of making the payment of their taxes was complex. That was simplified by the government of India. Now, we have also seen in recent years, the goods and services tax was introduced. This was introduced further to simplify the indirect taxes. Various indirect taxes was brought together into one taxing system, which is your goods and services tax.